Nimish, I want to ask you this, that ultimately money is money and investments are investments. Could you give us a list of maybe tips or maybe a checklist or some advice for our listeners? You know, what I'm seeing nowadays is that a lot of people with, obviously they wouldn't have the AUMs to come to someone like you, but they increasingly ask the question, now what do I do? You know, could be even a 30-year-old who's has 5 years of savings, and that's a reasonably large amount, and so on and so forth. And they just don't get that quality of advice, leave alone service. Okay, there's advice, there's service, there's hand-holding. There's a lot that goes into these kind of relationships. I'm sure that you know that.
Sure.
What would you tell them here? I mean, in terms of, let's look at it in two ways. One is the advice part. When you go seeking advice for your investments, what should you look out for? Let's start from there.
Sure. So basically, it starts with the fact that what do you really want out of that money, right? So like what they say that in terms of what is the risk that you want to take, right? Is it that you are expecting, returns in 1 year, or you're expecting in 3 years, or you want to keep it for, many people come to us saying, hi, this is 30-year money, right? But the moment the market goes down by 10%, it suddenly becomes 3-month money.
Or overnight also.
Overnight also,
Yeah.
right? So that clarity has to be there. And that comes with the basic faith in the economy that you are investing.
Okay.
Right. So whether it is India or offshore, if you're investing in India, do you have a basic faith that for the next 3 years to 5 years, India is going to grow at say 6% with a underlying inflation at 4%? So 10% absolute
Normal,
growth
yeah.
is any case coming in. The companies in which I'm investing will give me about 1.5 to 2 times of that underlying growth which is there.
Okay.
So that's the basic faith I need to have before I kind of start investing also.
Yeah.
And with that faith in mind, that's the kind of, the next question would be in terms of where to invest and what are the options available to me.
Yeah.
And that's where we kind of begin the journey with saying that, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, the journey kind of goes from there.
So if I were to, my next question, and in fact the last question, would be that when it comes to this choice of asset allocation and diversification, do you have any broad guidelines? Like there's the 60-40 rule that a lot, 100 minus age. I think that's one thing that is there.
Yeah.
Just some general stuff that people know that, okay, I'm on the right track. Okay, I'll ask you two things. One is in terms of equity versus debt. How should one generally look at that? And second is passive versus active. But those are the two, I think those are the two stumbling blocks for a lot of people that I talk to in terms of how to design their portfolio. What happens is that they mess up on all sides. They'll either go over the top on equity, or they'll go extra safe on debt. They'll either, have like tons of passive instruments now, because there are tons of passive.
And then complain that the returns are not there.
Thank you. So if we could just talk finally on this aspect of equity versus debt and passive versus active, some takeaways for our listeners.
Sure. So, the equity versus debt begins with your risk profiling and what is that you are expecting. I don't believe in the formula of 100 minus age. It is purely because, if you have money, then there is no question of being kind of safe, right? So as long as your basic needs are met, then you don't need to be necessarily safe and say, I want 80% of my investments in, debt because I am 70 years old. Right. So that kind of formula doesn't work. So it is more from the perspective of what is the risk that you are kind of taking and what is the return that you want out of that portfolio.
Sure.
So once that is clear, then your equity component can definitely, but generally we are seeing that equity is anywhere between 60% to 80% of a client's portfolio.
Nice. Okay.
And especially if you're looking at the age gap of 30 to 50, right? And that's where generally people are kind of, heavily loaded. Now more so because of the taxation on debt. Right, so that has actually veered more kind of towards equity, and to that extent, it becomes important to kind of understand that kind of correlation between equity and debt.
Sure.
And the taxes matter. Yeah. So as of now, we are in a situation in India where equity is taxed differently from debt. I am sure as India progresses, that will kind of homogenize, and you'll have the same tax whether it is fixed income or equity. But one has to be prepared for that. Yeah. So that's an aspect of that. The second aspect within that is in terms of the cost. So you'd be mindful of the cost which you're incurring when you're investing.
Sure.
And therefore that is something which an advisor will kind of tell you how to kind of go around that.
Linked to the cost is passive versus active, right?
Because that's right. So then therefore coming to passive versus active is that yes, some part of your portfolio should be into passive. Now there was till about, if you look at 3 months or 4 months back, there was a very definite thought process saying that, large caps have not kind of outperformed, large cap fund managers have not been able to outperform the passive benchmarks as such. So therefore, a lot of people went into passive. But if you look at the last 4 months, right,
It's reversed.
It's reversed,
Yeah.
right? So large cap fund managers have started performing because their inherent thought process that I don't want PSUs beyond a point, or I don't want a certain kind of sectors like
Whatever,
oil marketing companies and all that. I don't want it to be more
Correct,
than 10%
yeah.
of my portfolio.
Yeah.
That is actually now played out.
Yeah.
Right, so it's all market cycles. So I would say that one has to be very careful when you're doing passive versus active. And now there is also a third option which is available, which is your passive plus. Or your factor-based investing,
Smart beta kind of
or
stuff.
your smart beta kind of thing. So that kind of gives you where you're playing on factors like momentum, or valuation, or even in terms of quality. So those are the aspects which are then available, and therefore I would say that passive should not be more than 15-20% of your portfolio.
Nice.
But
I don't hear that often.
otherwise, you will start complaining that the index is given 10 and I'm getting 9 or 10. But I have seen other schemes which are giving me 15%, 18%. Where have I gone wrong?
Yeah. Okay. I want to sneak in one more question actually.
Sure.
The prospect of, very happy prospect, I assume, of people who get a large sum of money. Could be bonus, could be, that happens once in a year on one specific day, or could be staggered. Could be a liquidity event which, my options are vested and I'm selling out. And that gives me a really nice pot of money. Okay. Well, in general, what are the guidelines here for people? Because some of them might just go and buy a car. Some of them might just go and buy a house. Okay, now I leave that decision to them. I'm no one to judge them. How do you guys approach this?
So in terms of, for example, if there is a sale of company or there is a bonus which is coming in, right? It's something which is not expected and it comes in suddenly.
Yeah.
So yes, we do say that fine, whatever your requirements or aspirations are as far as your lifestyle is concerned, you kind of set aside that pot of money and that you kind of pre-decide, and that's fine. Otherwise, it's not an endless. Otherwise, what typically happens is that the money comes in, it lies for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, and then suddenly you see it disappear.
Exactly.
Because like what you said, you buy a fancy watch or a car or a fancy bag, right? But important is that if you are setting aside when the money is coming in, saying that okay, 20% of that I'm going to kind of set aside for my lifestyle requirement, and 80% I will kind of invest.
That's a good number. It's a generous number.
It's
old timers like me would say 90-10 or maybe 95-5, maybe even 100
Yeah.
should go into investment completely.
Because inflation is now.
Yeah, but 80-20 is a good number.
Yeah.
20% set aside for indulgence or whatever.
And that money, I would say that take more risk, whatever you're investing.
Interesting.
So that 80% you can take more risk than what you would normally do from your normal salary. So that 80% don't put it again into an SIP, which is the same asset allocation as was there earlier.
Oh, nice. I didn't think
Because
of
there's
it that
something which
way.
you're not expected.
It's a lump sum. Yeah.
It's a lump sum, and therefore you can take that risk, saying that fine, let me kind of take more kind of risk, unless you have a goal in mind, saying I want to buy a house after 3 years, and this will help me buy that house. Then it's a different thing.
Oh yeah, but then that gets allocated there directly.
Then you go into arbitrage fund for the next 3 years till the time that you're going to buy a house.
Yeah. Keep your goal in mind.
Keep your goal in mind.
Keep your goal in mind, and of course.
But otherwise, take risk and kind of invest, and because that's where your wealth creation will happen.